My name is Erik Sowa, and I take care of engineering and technical operations for ULive. And I'm here to talk to you about front-end ops and the OODA loop, a decision cycle time strategy for winning in a hostile internet environment. So ULive is the brand within Scripps Networks Interactive that is focused on online video syndication. We're augmenting the revenue stream from cable with digital video distributed over the internet. Our video players are embedded in dozens of publishers' websites, and the revenue comes from advertising. So now let's unpack the title a little bit so you know what you're going to be hearing about today. By the end of this presentation, you'll appreciate the emerging term front-end operations and how it might relate to DevOps. You'll have heard about the military history and business applications of Colonel John Boyd's OODA loop model. You'll understand why cycle time compression is important in a hostile business environment or any kind of competitive environment. And you'll have been introduced to concepts of maneuver warfare in the same context. I hope to convince you that maneuver warfare principles are on a par with the Toyota production system principles when it comes to influencing and inspiring our community of flow-minded practitioners. So let's start with the OODA loop. OODA is observe, orient, decide, and act. And that's how Adrian Cockcroft kicked off this conference a year ago. His keynote, Velocity and Volume, or Speed Wins, modeled the continuous innovation cycle in the cloud as an OODA loop. And he inspired me to revisit the work of Colonel John Boyd. So that was really great to see that talk last year. And it's online. If you haven't seen it yet, you should check it out. I first learned about John Boyd, the OODA loop, and maneuver warfare concepts applied to business at the Lean Software and Systems Conference in 2011 in Long Beach, where Chet Richards gave a fascinating talk entitled Fundamental Secrets of the Universe. Then I realized this year at some point that I'd actually heard about it first and read about it first in Michael Nygaard's excellent book, Release It, but I didn't appreciate its importance until later, until I had some of the context around it. So Chet was the one who really got me thinking about it hard. And after hearing Chet Richards speak, I read Robert Corum's biography of John Boyd and Chet's book, Certain to Win, The Strategy of John Boyd Applied to Business. And they're really, really very interesting books. And of particular interest to me are the cultural and teamwork traits common to smaller, more mobile teams that defeat larger, more entrenched organizations by being able to learn faster. So John Boyd was a fighter pilot in the Korean War. And US pilots flew F-86 fighters. These are F-86s up there on the screen. And they flew them against Chinese pilots who were flying MiG-15s. Now, MiG-15s had superior performance characteristics in key elements like acceleration, climbing, and turning. But they were shot down 10 times more often than they managed to shoot down F-86s. To understand why, Boyd zeroed in on visibility and maneuverability. The F-86 had a bubble canopy. Pilots had an unparalleled view of the sky surrounding them, so they could see what was going on in a wider field than their opponents. And they also had hydraulic controls, essentially power steering, which the MiGs didn't have. So the pilots had the ability to adjust the aircraft path quickly without fatigue. Boyd derived the OODA loop model from this experience. In spite of the power mismatch favoring the MiG, superior visibility and maneuverability enabled US pilots to shoot them down at a 10-to-1 ratio. The bubble canopy made for faster observation and orientation, the first two steps in the loop here. And the hydraulic controls made for relatively faster decisions and actions. F-86 pilots were able to work their way inside the loops of the MiG-15 pilots and dominated. Later in his career, John Boyd upset the military procurement process with these lessons. He fought against generals who were trying to get planes that just did better acceleration, climbing, and turning. He was really into the maneuverability thing and made a lot of people angry by fighting against that. He became the prophet without honor in his own house, if you like. But on the other hand, at the same time, Marine officers coming out of the aftermath of Vietnam were studying maneuver war concepts, and they kind of adopted John Boyd as one of their own. There were more Marine officers than Air Force officers at Boyd's funeral. And as the intensity and pace of competition continues to heat up, the OODA loop and related maneuver warfare concepts are finding their way into business, and you can see footprints of it everywhere. So let's look at OODA loop in the context of Scripps again, in the context of our online video syndication. We're an ad-supported business, and we're on the internet. So people have all kinds of words to describe what the internet is like, and Wild Wild West is one of the more printable versions. There's a lot more nasty things that people will say when they're in the middle of some attack on their servers, if you like. So it's reasonable to ask whether the OODA loop model is helpful in this context. So we're going to look at the ULIV video syndication stack through the lens of the OODA loop here. Our equivalent of the bubble canopy observer is our video player. It's embedded in publishers' websites, and it can see how users are interacting with videos and ads. We can count the number of times people have watched a particular video. We can tell whether there's ones that aren't as engaging, that people fall off, they don't finish them, all kinds of stuff like that. And depending on the implementation details, we can also see a lot of other things happening on the same page. There may be other video players from other providers that are competing for load time and other resources on the page. We don't have access, however, to the publisher's servers, so how do we get our intelligence on what's actually going on out there in the field? Typical DevOps practices such as monitoring and alerting and all that good stuff are still possible with front-end operations. And the instrumented browser application is the heart of front-end operations. So our video players are constantly phoning home. We need that data to understand how users are engaging with our content, which helps with everything from billing to knowing whether there are errors happening in the field. And I mentioned that these players are embedded. What actually goes in the web page of one of our publishers is an embed code that when the end user renders the page, it will call out and actually fetch its code from our servers or the CDN on which it's stashed for performance reasons. And that gives us the ability to actually change that player anytime we want. We don't have to go and ask them to redeploy it. Every time somebody renders a page with our player in it, it will know whether there's fresh code to get or not. So that's really important for the sort of continuous delivery workflow. Now I want to call out a couple of citations for the term front-end operations. Alex Sexton coined the term, or at least was the first one to publish an article about it in Smashing Magazine. That was in 2013. And it turned into a conference that happened in April of this year in San Francisco. There are a whole bunch of people thinking about turning front-end engineering into the same sort of collaborative workflow as we've done on the server side with DevOps practices. So a lot of the same sort of things can be done here, although I will admit that it's technically harder because there are all the usual caveats about browsers and operating system versions and the like that you have to pay attention to. So that's what front-end operations is and why it's so important for us. So the front-end engineer can't be happy with just having deployed the code. He or she has to understand how it's performing in the field. So we're collecting thousands of events per second from our players in the field. What do we do with all that data? Well, per the OODA model, we turn that data into insight that supports making decisions and taking action. As in Boyd's model, previous experience drives much of the analysis, but we also have to be open to new and changing information. If something's out there happening in the internet that we've never seen before, we might have to change the way we think about observing and orienting. The way that we do our orient step is we've built a data operating system based on our understanding of our ecosystem that listens to those observations and grinds on the data to orient us to what's happening in the field. So raw events are ingested, stored in these data primitive tables. We keep those data primitives around, practically speaking, forever because we never know what sort of insight we might want to use those to generate. So batch jobs, this is a Hadoop system here, batch jobs turn those data primitives into business primitives. Those are things like counting and sorting video views, turning that raw data into information that is more connected to the purpose of what we're doing with our stack. And further processing beyond that makes the insights accessible through reports and dashboards. You've all seen pictures of a team taking care of a launch of a new feature or a new website, and they're all looking at the monitors overhead where you've got various performance characteristics graphed. That's the kind of thing that we do with these reports and dashboards. We keep our eye on what's going on out in the field because we're eventually going to have to do something about it. One more slide on how our orientation system works. We don't just consume player events in that. We can correlate player events with other sources of data, such as logs from the advertising servers. We use Freewheel. Data from measurement services like ComScore and Nielsen that may affect whether our advertisers will pay us or not. And even Adobe Audience Manager, which we use for targeting. It's the correlation of those various data sources that actually gives the real levers to the business. So an example would be player views without the expected proportion of ad views would indicate a problem with ad configuration or delivery. That's a simple example, and I'll cite it again later. But it's a pretty powerful system. So again, we have the players out in the field phoning home all the time, and we're grinding on the data continuously to show what's happening. And the insights feed forward into decision making. It's interesting that Boyd here frames decision as a hypothesis. That fits kind of nicely into the things that you may have heard over the recent months and years from the lean startup community. Nobody in the keynote sessions this morning liked the word requirements. Requirements are really hypotheses, some people will tell you, and they need to be tested. Anyway, I've got a picture of a dashboard of an airplane cockpit here, a fighter pilot cockpit. If the dashboard inside is situation normal, the decision can be a no-op. Just go back to the observer loop again. However, if the indicators are out of range, if you're seeing things that you didn't expect or that cause you concern, the operator can decide to take action. And one output of the decision-making process is taking action, which you can frame as testing that hypothesis. And testing a decision requires going around the loop again, adjusting the observation and orientation steps as appropriate. For example, we could deploy new or changed events for the player, along with new data workflows to process these events. And that would give us a new dimension of insight. And that also demands continuous delivery principles and practices that we all know and love. A business is more agile when it can execute the OODA loop more quickly. But that doesn't mean blindly building product features faster. It means simply being quicker to recognize and respond when appropriate. The fighter pilot who took this picture is not firing his weapons continuously, only when the situation indicates that firing the weapons will have a payoff. And so that's essentially the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act, repeat continuously. It's a pretty powerful concept, and particularly in a hostile environment, which were its origins. So another concept that I want to unpack briefly here is cycle time compression. Marty Kagan mentioned Mark Andreessen in his keynote, and I pulled this tweet out of one of his tweet storms earlier this year. Cycle time compression may be the most underestimated force in determining winners and losers in tech. And I guess that's sort of implying that if you make a discipline about compressing your decision cycle time, Mark Andreessen might be more inclined to invest in your startup. Another example that I'm going to draw from is where compressing decision cycle time is even more important in a hostile environment. And this is a recent blog post from the Twitter engineering team about their spam fighting technology. Reduce the reaction time to new spam attacks. Spam evolves constantly. Spammers respond to the system defenses, and the cycle never stops. In order to be effective, we have to be able to collect data and evaluate and deploy rules and models quickly. So we're not the only ones doing this. Pretty much anybody who's living in the data stream on the public internet is going to be in the position to deploy some kind of OODA loop to make their business more effective. So let's go back to the syndication context for a minute here. Since this is business, winning means that the money coming in has to exceed the money going out. Pretty simple, right? And in syndication, we must serve ads to have the money coming in. So it behooves us to pay timely attention to these matters. 2 years ago, we looked at the data at the end of every month. This was certainly adequate for billing, but as we discovered to our chagrin, sometimes a misconfigured ad caused a campaign to miss days of revenue. That's, of course, unacceptable. So we first had to improve our service delivery capability by learning to use the product. I had already delivered hourly aggregates of the data, it's just that nobody was looking at them. So we had to sort of train ourselves as a service delivery organization to take advantage of all that insight. And then we improved our product to enable checking the ad delivery mere minutes after campaign launch. That was with some Elasticsearch magic. Shrinking decision cycle times made us more competitive as a business and more fit for purpose as a service delivery team. When we launch a campaign now, we can tell right away whether it's working or not. While we were attending to our service delivery capabilities, the internet was not standing still. This New York Times article from last May is calling public attention to threats and challenges to our business model, ranging from other players on the same pages competing for resources all the way to bot traffic attacking the revenue stream directly. These challenges are aptly described by my friend Jim Benson, who recently tweeted, "You can steer the car, but you can't steer the road." You don't control everything when you're running a business on the internet. So your plans will not survive the first contact with the enemy, or with the environment anyway. So, I went too fast there. Let me go back. A hostile environment puts tremendous pressure on culture and management methods. So waiting for permission or approval can be fatal. The team must be able to act freely within mission constraints to advance the goals of the organization. Even a peaceful person, and I've never been in the military myself, must acknowledge that military history and culture might provide some valuable inspiration here. No matter what one might think of the motives of successful maneuver warfare teams, many of whom we would consider to be bad guys. Strategic and tactical genius is not confined to the winning side nor to the politically virtuous. So if you're into learning, you got to study this stuff. And two good sources to study it are these two books, Stephen Bungay's Art of Action and The Marine Corps Way. They're good. They're contrasting. The former is a thoughtful historical analysis in the European style, citing Prussian military history, and the latter is a gung-ho business book by former Marine officers. They're both pretty good, but from my background, I found Stephen Bungay's book to be more like the way that I like to think about it. And Chet and Stephen Bungay both cite primarily German military history, and I'm going to use the 5 German words on this slide to outline the cultural and teamwork characteristics that we found to be very effective in a hostile environment where compressing cycle times is important. So as the Toyota production system influence has brought Japanese words into our community, so maneuver warfare brings German words, and the German language is notorious for compounding nouns to get just exactly the right word, no matter how long it is, to describe something. So these words don't have an exact translation in one word, so we'll go through them one at a time. So the first one is Einheit. So small, nimble teams like Guderian's Panzers share several interesting cultural and teamwork characteristics which we would like to apply in our hostile internet environment. Einheit can mean unity or team cohesion or trust. We all know trust is the lubricant for fast-reacting teams. And to make a DevOps point here, the real value of developers knowing how operations works and operations knowing how development works is empathy for each other's roles. You see here on this, this picture a number of different kinds of things going on, and people are crossing the bridge in two different ways, two different directions, but they're all part of the same team, and they all probably have a pretty good understanding of how each other works. You see that also in Marine combat teams. Everybody is cross-trained so that they can cover for each other in unfortunate events, but one of the biggest values there is team cohesion. Everybody understands everybody else's job and knows how to work with them. Pretty important concept and pretty much the foundation of it. But there are forces that can conspire against you. Clausewitz used the term friction to describe how simple things become difficult in war because of many misfortunes and mistakes. And flow is impeded in a resistant medium, and his quote from On War is, "Activity in war is a movement in a resistant medium." So there's a particular form of friction that I found that you have to manage somehow to get this sort of team cohesion, the Einheit that we're looking for here. And that is a friction that comes from Conway's law, which asserts that system architectures are copies of the communication patterns of the organization that builds and operates them. That's a tremendous source of internal friction, and if you let it go unmanaged, you end up with people who don't understand how other people contribute to the goals of the organization. So DevOps is one example of that. You can move it up to a larger scale and say the product team versus the team that is managing the partners that put our players on the page. If we don't understand each other's jobs, then we can't help each other achieve the goal. And we certainly can't afford the time it takes for a decision to move up to some high and mighty manager and wind its way back down to the other team again, because things get lost in translation, as we learned from Jeff in the last talk here. So the second of the German words I want to call out here is Behandigkeit. Nimbleness and agility can overcome unexpected obstacles and challenges, and Behandigkeit is really about agility. I've pulled up a picture here that illustrates what the Marines would call combined arms, in some sense at least. Why would these guys rowing this barge care about the tanks? Because they're all working towards the same purpose, and the two functions together are more powerful than the sum of the parts. So, Behandigkeit. The third word is a really fun mouthful to say here, Fingerspitzengefühl. It's an intuitive feel for the situation at hand. This, along with Behandigkeit, can come from rehearsal, wargaming, and repetition. Engaging the simian army prepares you for the real army, to use a Netflix thing from Adrian's talk last year. Being able to look at a graph and tell in a glance whether the situation requires attention is invaluable. You have to understand what's going on in your dashboard and be able to see the patterns. You can't be learning to read a map in a firefight. This practice trains your intuitive thinking, what Kahneman might call System 2, and thinking fast and slow. Pretty important concept. The fourth one is one of my favorites as well, Auftragstaktik, or mission orders. Mission orders convey the commander's intent and desired end state. The what and the why. We heard the importance of the why this morning, and the what is the objective, the purpose. But we have to leave the skills, the how, to the skills and motivation of the team. And these officers in this picture, including Rommel himself, are not hiding out in chateaus in the rear. They're out in the field with their troops, observing directly, getting the contexts. Mary this morning mentioned Henrik Knieberg and the Spotify work, and I happen to have one of his slides in my deck here. Decentralized decision making is a really good antidote to organizational friction in a rapidly changing environment. And alignment is the process of making clear the constraints, the scope of autonomy to be exercised. He has a nice little two-axis quadrant graph here with alignment and autonomy. And of course, what we're looking for is aligned autonomy. Those squads that Mary called out do know what the purpose of a Spotify is, and they're working towards its ends. And that's what engenders the cooperation that you need in order to achieve a great result. And if you haven't seen the Spotify engineering culture video, do yourself a favor and look it up and watch it. It's I think it's about 10 minutes long, but it's pure goodness. It's really fun. The fifth and final word, Schwerpunkt, focus and direction. You can really only have one primary mission, and when everybody on that team understands that mission, they're empowered to put aside any secondary tasks to support the primary whenever the opportunity or need arises. That's really important for fast reaction times. You have to have people who can swarm onto the new and developing problem, whether it's an attack by bots or whatever you encounter in your world. And I would be remiss if I didn't call out limiting work in progress as an important focusing tool. That slack that I described, not everybody's working on the primary purpose all the time, but they can stop and turn on a dime and reinforce the primary mission. That's hugely important. So EBFOS, those 5 German words, are how I like to think about the maneuver warfare culture and teamwork characteristics that enable small organizations to beat bigger, more ossified institutions. So what does that all mean for me and my teams? Implementing DevOps-style tooling on the front end is still a hard problem. There's still a whole lot to do in the domain of front-end operations, and I'm pretty sure they're going to have another front-end ops conference in the spring of next year, and I plan to be there learning a bit from my fellow practitioners how they're solving these kind of problems. It's a pretty good conference. The videos are online. If you're interested in this kind of stuff, you can go see what happened this April and look forward to next April. And to close, I'd like to point out that, to be honest, focus and direction are challenging to maintain in a hostile environment with many stakeholders, particularly in a corporation with IT thinking going on, IT mindset. Recognizing that compressing decision cycle times is not the same as building features faster is a key, as is evolving teams of people to fitness of purpose for operating the loop. Tooling is necessary but not sufficient to achieve that cycle time compression. Obsessively tending the culture matters. And with that, I'll thank you. The slides will be posted online, and I do have image credits and sources in the presenter notes. And you can contact me if you have questions or want to engage with me on this or any related topics. Thanks again.